本期视频是2023年9月马凯硕一段访谈的节选。谈话中，马凯硕提到，美国两党已达成共识，用10年的时间阻止中国成为第一。美国对华为的打压引起全体中国人同仇敌忾的历史原因，以及为什么今天的中国绝非当年的苏联。我们来看看他是怎么说的吧。
I see almost one-way street in terms of more and more export restrictions from the U.S. and more support for Taiwan and so on. So what are the parameters that you're looking at when you say that they have actually done a commendable job in stabilizing the relationship?
Well, I would say the one good thing that the Biden administration done is to resume normal communications with China. So as you know, in this year, 2023, Blinken has gone to China. Janet Yellen has gone to China. Most recently, Gina Raimondo has gone to China. So at least he's tried to keep the dialogue going. But of course, this doesn't mean, by the way, that the whole U.S. campaign to stop China from becoming number one has stopped. It hasn't. Because there's something that's beyond Trump and Biden, and that is that within the American establishment, there is a remarkable consensus that the US has about 10 years to stop China from becoming number one. And, that's what my book, Has China Won, is about. That there is an incredible focused determination now on the part of the American establishment to use the next 10 years to stop China, because they know that once China becomes number one, and it can become number one, then everything changes in the world. So regardless of whether or not Trump wins or Biden wins or Vivek Ramaswamy wins or Kamala Harris wins, it doesn't matter. And it comes to this geopolitical contest between US and China, it goes beyond personalities. And this is something that I've been predicting for a long time. And nothing has changed the course of this.
But Kishore, in the podcast that we had 2 years ago, your assertion was that the Trump administration did not have a strategy vis-a-vis China. They were going a bit helter-skelter. But it seems to me that now you're painting a picture where there is a bipartisan consensus and there is a pretty cohesive strategic view of how to counter China.
There is a bipartisan consensus to counter China, but there is still no strategy. And what the sadly, and I say this as a friend of the United States, the United States is carrying out ad hoc action after ad hoc action without having a clear strategy on how you're going to stop China. So, for example, take the trade tariffs that Trump administration put against China, right? Now, if you ask any sensible economist, which, by the way, would include people like Janet Yellen, will these trade tariffs hurt China more or hurt the American consumers more? And the simple answer is going to hurt the American consumers more. In fact, Joe Biden said so in his election campaign. But has the Biden administration been able to lift the trade sanctions on China? No way. See, that reflects a lack of strategy. And similarly, all these acts to stop China's technological development, denying them the most advanced chips, there's a long history of countries trying to stop China's technological development. And it has never succeeded. I mean, I'll give you a simple example. The Soviet Union thought that they could remain much stronger than China by depriving China of access to nuclear weapon technology. Guess what? Within a couple of years, the Chinese had it. Right? So, China is now producing more STEM graduates, I suspect, than the rest of the world combined in some ways, And the idea that you can stop China from becoming a scientific power is absurd. The Americans refuse to collaborate with China in the space program. Look at what China has done. Build its own space station. So it is actually, this is where the fundamental problem with people in the American administration is that they don't have a long-term mindset. They don't realize that the Chinese are looking to see where they're going to be, where the world is going to be 10 years, 20 years down the road. And you ask the Biden administration people, they are so focused on the November 2024 election, they can't look beyond that. And so that actually puts the US at a strategic disadvantage vis-a-vis China. It doesn't mean, by the way, that the US can't do significant damage or temporary damage to the Chinese economy. It can. We'll try. Will that stop China's growth? I don't think it will.
It is remarkable that this issue about technological supremacy is become such a focus and obsession of the media. I'm sure you've seen in the last few days rather hysterical coverage in Western media about Huawei's sort of return to the smartphone scene with a new phone, and everybody's questioning how on earth did they get the chips or the know-how to do it, because Huawei was supposed to be on a terminal decline after the Trump administration's bans a few years ago. So I think that adds to your point that not only on nuclear technology or space technology, even the one that is absolutely critical now, the chip technology and the frontier of electronics, it's not like they will be fully strangled. Damage will be done, no question, but that may be just a manifestation of slowing down as opposed to stopping them forever.
By the way, you're right. You're right to mention this Huawei case. I must say, I'm really surprised too. I thought, I by the way, I actually conducted a dialogue once with the founder of Huawei, Mr. Ren, on Bloomberg TV, and I was very impressed by him. He's very dedicated, and what the Americans underestimate is the determination of the Chinese people. And the Americans also don't understand that when they carry out actions against Huawei, they're pouring salt into open Chinese wounds. And these open Chinese wounds come from the century of humiliation that China suffered from 1842 to 1949. And when you carry out actions like Huawei, they say, there goes the West once again. They want to beat up China. They want to slap China down. But this time, they cannot succeed. So, the national determination in China is absolutely amazing. And so I wish that the Americans leaders who make a bigger effort to studying Chinese history, and by the way, I have a free edX course for them that they can enroll in, and they will see that they got to step into the shoes of the Chinese leaders and understand that the Chinese cannot allow China to go backwards again.
But sure, I've seen people draw parallels between U.S. restrictions on Soviet Union in the 60s, 70s, 80s on area of technology. And as a result, the view is that the Soviets actually did have a huge gap with respect to frontier technology, notwithstanding their success in the space program. And the view is that this is going to be something that can be replicated in the context of China, that if you have very strong trade barriers for China to access frontier technology, it will not be able to develop on its own. Is your view that China will also have a bit of a Sputnik moment that the Americans had after Sputnik's successful launch, and they would rather starve than miss out on the frontier technologies?
Well, I'm actually very, very glad that you're bringing up this historical analogy, because if indeed the Biden administration or the US government is using the old playbook against the Soviet Union and saying, we can use the same playbook that succeeded with the Soviet Union against China, then they're getting it dead wrong. Because the Soviet Union, in many ways, had self-isolated. It didn't trade with the rest of the world. Its economy wasn't engaged with the rest of the world. And at the end of the day, what caused the collapse of the Soviet Union was not the access to advanced technology. It was the fact that their economy couldn't compete with the American economy, just couldn't grow as fast. And was stagnant, couldn't produce the consumer goods and so on and so forth. and certainly could not manufacture more than the United States of America. Now, let me ask you a simple question. Who has a larger manufacturing capability today? Is it the United States or is it the China? Now, let me ask you a second question. Who does more trade with the rest of the world? In the old days, clearly United States over the Soviet Union. Today is China over the United States of America. Then let me ask you a third question. Between the United States and Soviet Union, which country was willing to sign free trade agreements in the Cold War? It was the United States, not the Soviet Union. Today, it is China and not the United States. So these are amazing differences. And if there's one country that has studied the collapse of the Soviet Union more than any other country in the world, it is China. And what's the first lesson that the Chinese took from the collapse of the Soviet Union? Never close up your economy. Always engage with the rest of the world. And it's sort of bizarre that in some ways, it is the United States that's behaving more like the Soviet Union, for example, by refusing to sign free trade agreements, than China does. But having said that, let me emphasize that the United States still remains a formidable economic power, a formidable political power, a formidable intellectual power in terms of soft power and so on and so forth. So it'd be a huge mistake for China to underestimate the United States of America.